will forever be a legend here at Tottenham. It's a massive club. Everything I do is for the long term.
And still Ricky Villa. What a fantastic run. He scored.
Gascoigne going to have a crack. He is, you know. Oh, he's there.
Here's Lucas Moura. Oh, they done it. The wait for silverware is over.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to the latest Tottenham Way podcast. It's our reaction to a 2-2 draw at Newcastle. Dramatic finale. Spurs snatch a point. Thanks to Cristian Romero, lots of talking points, not least, of course, the penalty that put Newcastle back in front. I'm Marcus Buckland. Tom Barkley of The Sun is with me. Before we go into the outrageous decision of that penalty, Tom, I will read the rulings, and I guess if you look at the rulings, technically Bentancur was guilty. But before we go into the minutiae of that, Spurs have picked up a point. They have twice come from behind, despite the fact that once more they look really toothless in front of goal for long periods. So if we part the performance and some of the concerns, might this just possibly prove to be a little bit of a turning point? It must have been a very difficult few weeks.
Hi, Marcus. That's a hard one to call because I don't think the performance overall from an attacking perspective was all that different, albeit they did score 2 goals and obviously got a point. But given the context of this week and 3 straight defeats and the mood around the fan base, at least, given with Thomas Frank, I think it was a good point and one at a difficult place to go. I know Newcastle's position in the league is actually below Spurs, I think, still because they haven't had the greatest starts to the season. But we all know what quality they have from just look at the subs who came on, Guimaraes and Gordon, who scored the goals. That going away to Newcastle and getting a result for Tottenham has been something very difficult of late. So given the context of where they're at, it's a very valuable and a hard-fought point that I think they probably deserved, mostly because of the injustice of the penalty. A performance all round, close one, but given the difficulties they've come up against recently, I think got to go glass half full and think that overall they maybe just about deserved it.
All right, well, let's get straight to the penalty because that's going to be the main talking point. Eddie Howe, interestingly, well, not interesting. I guess when you're the opposing manager, you're going to say, it was probably the right decision. I'd love there to have been a follow-up question. So, Eddie, if that had been awarded against you, you're telling me that you'd have been happy. But, anyway, now, the threshold for holding offence, Tom B., is sustained and or impactful holding. Clear impact on the opponent's opportunity to play or challenge for the ball. Clear, bracket, extreme, non-footballing action with impact on the opponent's movement. The next rule, perhaps the most pertinent one in this situation, not looking at the ball, only focusing on the opponent and not challenging for the ball, and also holding an opponent with both arms. So, of course, it was Bentancur, and he was being completely outsized in many ways by Dan Burn. By the end of it all, he's in a headlock from Dan Burn. But I guess you could argue, and VAR will argue, that Bentancur never looked at the ball and did sufficiently impede Burn to the extent that they felt a penalty should be given. I mean, playing with the devil's advocate, can you see why a penalty was awarded?
Yes, based on those rules, that's the thing that's done for him, not looking at the ball. But as one of my mates who messaged me pointed out, that one of the part of the reason he wasn't looking at the ball is his head was stuck in Dan Burn's armpit, and he physically couldn't. I think this is one where Thomas Frank's spoken about it afterwards, saying it was a sort of VAR's mistake, and I actually agree with that. The referee didn't give it. Dan Burn barely appealed. Yes, Bentancur's not looking at the ball. And so when they started to look at it, when Jamie Carragher on the TV was sort of dismissing it as if it was never going to be given, that was the sort of thing that made me think, I'm not so sure about that. And obviously we saw what happened. And as soon as he goes to his monitor, it's going to get overturned because that's just the way it goes. But I just don't think the VAR really needs to intervene. They're being way too pedantic in that case. And there'll be numerous examples this season of similar incidents where penalties haven't been given. So that will wind up the fans no end. So yeah, I guess letter of the law, but anyone who sort of has watched football this season will probably think off the top of their head of similar incidents involving their team where it hasn't been given. So I think Spurs can rightly feel massively hard done by.
I also wish the referee would be brave enough when summoned to the monitor to look for himself and stick to his original decision. Thomas Bramall in this instance. Come on, guys. You're getting plenty of opportunities to have a look. And you know by now that it's quite possible that the others, wherever they are, is it still Stockley Park, may have got it wrong. So be brave enough to uphold your original decision. That really infuriates me. And what I'd have been really fascinated by, Tom, had Romero not produced his Leo Messi-inspired equaliser in the last minute, would Spurs have been given a penalty, effectively, for the same reasons? What do you think?
Well, watching that incident back for the Romero's overhead kick, I don't think that would, by my rationale, I'm not sure it would have been a penalty. But then you see the way that the one is given against Burn, and then it probably should be given a penalty. I don't think either of them are penalties, really, is the way I saw it. But but if you're going to give the Burn one, then I think had Romero not scored very much, then that might well have gone to a penalty review. I mean, I know you say about the referee and he should be stronger, but the problem is it's not like Stockley Park have made a mistake by the letter of the law. So if he's suddenly looking at it and being told, he's not looking at the ball and he's sort of just about holding him off, which is the sort of two things together, he can't really go against the law. He's the referee, the one who's supposed to uphold it. So I just don't think it should ever have got to that point. And there'll be, as I said, I'm sure there'll probably be an incident next week where Tottenham will have maybe something similar go against them or go for them, and we'll just all be left as ever. It's just so frustrated over the lack of consistency.
Well, we've spent so many weeks and podcasts talking about VAR, and we'll continue to do so. It's incredibly frustrating. You're right, maybe things even themselves out, but that's just wrong. And I was interested here, actually, Rob Hawthorne, the commentator tonight. I think one area where VAR should be used, because it's straightforward, is to decide whether it's a corner or not. I mean, sometimes it's not a big decision. Sometimes it can be. Spurs had a blatant corner early in the first half, and it was overlooked. I mean, this is where the whole technology thing becomes frustrating. That's a really easy decision to reverse because the linesman or the referee got it wrong. And I believe they're thinking about bringing it in for the World Cup next summer, possibly. I'd be in favour of that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's what they said in commentary. That's what they said in commentary, that it might come in for the World Cup. And I guess it's just how easy it is to do. I imagine with balls going over the line or not going over the line, you'd like to think it'd be like the goal line technology, just a beeper would go off. Or yeah, I agree. I don't disagree. I'm not really. I guess the argument against is people have had such a generally negative response to VAR that I guess they're loath to introduce even more technology. But for something like that. And how often does that even happen in a game where a ball doesn't go out of play? But every time it does happen, it gets massively talked about because it feels like such an easy thing to fix. So you'd like to think that. I bet that's one of those ones I would have thought where if they introduced it quite quickly, we go, why did we not do this from the beginning?
Yeah. In terms of the lineup tonight, we all play Thomas Frank bingo. I was way off the mark. Well, nobody thought that Van de Ven was going to get rested tonight, and I heard him explaining before the game, 4 matches in the space of 10 days, and this one, the third of those 4 away from home, was physically the toughest. He's got to be careful. He's got to make sure that he keeps players relatively fresh, and I know there's a huge home game against Brentford on Saturday. I also wonder if maybe, rightly perhaps, he felt that tonight there was going to be a big aerial threat from Voltemada in particular, as opposed to huge issues in terms of keeping up with fast strikers. And therefore, it kind of made sense to have Danso alongside Romero. So maybe with the benefit of hindsight, would you actually say it was quite a shrewd decision to leave Van de Ven on the bench tonight?
Yeah, I would actually. Thomas Frank's had a lot of criticism of late, and I've been including from myself over various things. But actually, that call over Van de Ven, I suppose, first of all, his management of Van de Ven so far physically has been so good that we're even at the point where we're always surprised that he's not playing. And then you're suddenly thinking, oh, I forgot about the fact that he kept getting injured and we kept getting worried that he couldn't last more than 45 minutes just 6 months ago. So big credit to the medical team and to Frank's management and the coaching staff for how they've handled Van de Ven. And then when you look at this particular game, you're right. Voltemade, not the quickest, more of a physical presence. He's not the best in the air, but he's obviously 6'7", isn't he? So it felt like a game where, despite them having sort of electric wingers, it wasn't probably as necessary to have that sort of jet heel pace that Van de Ven had. And I think that's so it proved throughout the game. I don't think there were many times where they were really caught in behind. And actually, Voltemade was pretty well marshalled, I would say, throughout the match. He's got a sort of paintbrush of a touch, and there was one moment where he trapped a ball in the box beautifully. But apart from that, I don't think he had his best game. And I think a lot of that has to go down to the way Danso and Romero managed to sort of stifle him throughout the game. So, you know, for one where we often criticise him for making too many changes or switching the formation, all this kind of thing, that particular change looked like it paid off, and hopefully, you know, he can come back in fresh for a massive home game against Brentford and continue this excellent fitness record that he's had this season.
Yeah, okay, so a tick in the box for Frank on that one. What about the fact that yet again the X-Man was left on the bench, and we hear from Thomas Frank, and we all kind of appreciated ourselves that if Javi Simons really is going to make an impact in the Premier League, he needs minutes on the pitch to adapt, to get used to the physical demands, etc., etc. Could you also make an argument that tonight, away to Newcastle, hostile territory, Wednesday night in the northeast, cold, etc., etc., this actually was not a game to start Xavi in, on the assumption that he's going to go hell for leather from the first minute against Brentford on Saturday?
I think the sort of response to that question is very much defined by what the result was in the game. The fact that he didn't lose, it feels like maybe a slightly smart call. He probably wouldn't have had that much impact from the beginning. But had they ended up losing the game, I think we'd be reflecting on 70 minutes of being very, very defensive in the match, not creating hardly any chances. I mean, look, it's the fourth Premier League game in a row that Tottenham hadn't had a shot on target in the first half. In fact, there are only 2 goals, which have obviously come from their centre-back, continuing the theme throughout this season, are the only 2 shots on target throughout the match. So Spurs were really lacking in creativity once again. So I think, you know, had they lost the game, we would be looking at that decision not to play Xavi, who on paper at least seems to be their most creative player. But having said that, you also can see why he was left out of this game. I mean, Newcastle Way is such a difficult fixture, particularly on this run that they've been on, and they've dug out, you know, a dogged result, which they deserve a lot of credit for, and you can see the logic behind it. It's just the fact that now it's 4 games in a row, isn't it, that Xavi's been left on the bench, and you really are starting to wonder where he'll play. And you're saying, you know, get him ready for Brentford at the weekend, but that's what we thought against Fulham, didn't we? And he didn't start that match either. So there's parts of me that's just wondering, does Thomas Frank just not fancy Xavi right now, or does he not think he's just up to speed? And I can kind of understand that, because I've been underwhelmed overall by Xavi. I mean, the irony was that when he first got benched in the first game of this run, I guess it was Arsenal away, I thought he was starting to show more confidence of the ball, more composure, and start to dictate play a bit more, which is what we'd hoped he'd do from the off. And then he's been sort of dropped out of it. But it's not like you can say, when you consider his season as a whole, that he's been sort of really forcing Frank's hand over his selection.
I mean, I think it's fair to say, I think we would all agree that Thomas Frank still clearly does not know what his best starting 11 is, what type of lineup he's looking for, because he said it many times before, it depends to a large degree on the opposition. I mean, I don't really like that. We've all said, come on, let's worry about what we can do, not what the opposition might do to us. So tonight he goes with Colomwani, and I actually thought Colomwani was growing into the game, and in fact I was bemoaning certainly 2 of the 3 substitutions, although within seconds of that, of course, we equalised for the first time. You think, okay, well, that's not so bad. And, you know, up front alongside Colomwani, we had Johnson, who I'm afraid to say I thought was effectively non-existent. But also Kulas. And I'm really interested in Kulas at the moment because, he arrived amidst the fanfare, played really well at the start of the season. He's obviously a good player. Tonight, an intriguing battle with Lewis Hall. I mean, I didn't think really he was getting the better of that battle. But to be fair to him, he comes up with the cross that leads to the first equaliser. I think that's his 5th assist of the season. I'm a little concerned about his form overall. I think he works hard, but maybe lacks that little bit of dynamism that we saw right at the start of the campaign. How would you assess Kulas tonight?
Yeah, that's interesting. His 5th Premier League assist is actually a sort of a division high. He's got the most assists in the league, and I saw that stat on social media along with what a signing he's been for Tottenham. And I was like, I wonder how many matches whoever wrote that has watched. I think he's overall been a good signing, but he's become a little predictable, I would say, of late when he's played. To be fair, the things that I was sort of praising him for at the start of the season, where he was able to drop a shoulder and run down the line, I think teams are sort of wising up to him a bit more over that particular move. And I think Lewis Hall generally had the measure of him today. I mean, Lewis Hall, now he's back to fitness. You can see why he's a shout to go to the World Cup if he can maintain his fitness at left back for England, at least to be in the picture, because he's a really good player. And it was an interesting battle. I thought he was winning. And when those subs were coming up, a friend of mine who's a Spurs fan was calling for Kulas to go off. He's surprised he hadn't been subbed. He thought he was poor tonight. And I think a few people thought he was poor the other night as well, despite scoring his really good goal. And then but then it's his delivery, isn't it? We saw it from his set pieces today, even though Newcastle generally defended them quite well. He's just got that laser-like delivery, and obviously it paid off. But so he's getting the numbers from an assist point of view, but I don't think anyone is who's watched Spurs regularly is being blown away that much by his recent performances. But that sort of speaks to the way the team is functioning from an attacking point of view all round. Like, it's either very little in creativity perspective, or it's quite predictable. And that again is Frank's sort of challenge to try and change that. And that's why I suppose fans might be calling for Javi, because he could maybe bring in that element of unpredictability and spark that this team don't really have. I thought Bergvall actually at times showed a few glimpses. He had that lovely little clever flick for that chance, and for Spurs' kind of only chance, and it was a half chance at that in the first half. And I think Carragher in commentary talks about how he sort of is one of those players who wants to step up and stand up and show himself to be the player he is when other players maybe don't sort of step into the limelight. I agree with that. I think Bergvall has that capacity about him to try and step up and be a big game player. But still, that was about it from Spurs' creativity, summed up by the fact that it was really their captain, Fantastic, who we haven't really talked about yet, who dug them out of a hole, really.
Yeah, well, let's come on to him. I thought actually Bergvall, up until Romero scored his 2 goals, was Tottenham's best player, and I was frustrated when he went off. I just think he's got some dynamism. He's definitely got something about him. Occasionally he tries these little flicks at the wrong time, but he'll learn. He's still only 19 years of age, but he gives you that belief that he wants to get the ball forward. He wants to try and make something happen, which unfortunately the majority of the other players just don't bring to the pitch at the moment. And just before we go on to Romero, for me, I think, and a lot of people are being very critical of Thomas Frank. A lot of people, I think, are critical of anybody who tries to defend Thomas Frank, which I have tried to do. I think he does deserve more time. But I do now want him to make a decision in terms of what's he going with? Are we going to have the 2 strikers up front? Because it worked to begin with when he had Richarlison and Kolo Muani. But every week it's different, and every week someone else comes off the bench. Are you going? Where's happened to Odobert? Odobert was doing good 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't know if he's carrying a bit of a knot, but suddenly he seems to have been relegated to maybe getting on for 5 minutes at the end. I think that time has come now for Frank to say, okay, I've been here for 6 months. I know I've got lots of holes to try and fill. I won't be naive enough to say I know for sure that this is what I should go with, but it's what I'm going to go with, and we need to get some consistency now, and the players need to be able to understand what the player behind them, in front of them, next to them is going to do. Otherwise we'll get these stop-start performances week in, week out. So Thomas, I know it's tough, it's easy to sit here and pontificate, but I want you to succeed. I think to do that now you're going to have to make a little bit of a decision and run with it. But Romero comes back tonight, heavily criticised, Tom, if you remember the game before last. And, you know, there are times when, and in fact, this evening I was thinking for a minute when he got the yellow card early on, I'm thinking, oh dear, is the red mist going to descend? And as we all know, and it's very lazy for the commentators to go, oh, there he gets booked again because he's really improved. But he's still got the potential to maybe lose the plot. But what a performance from the back, showing the mentality. Brilliant header to get in front of Dan Burn for the equaliser. And then, okay, he may have shinned the overhead a little bit. But as he said in his post-match interview, when you've been training with Leo Messi, you pick up little techniques. And what a sweet moment. What a little bit of justice that was after the outrageous penalty decision.
Yeah, I agree. Let's just go for a quick ad break and I'll tell you my thoughts on Romero. So, as I said before, Captain Fantastic. I thought he really stepped up today from an attacking point of view to the point where Thomas Frank maybe should consider playing him up front the way he took his goals. I mean, the first one in particular, absolute bullet header, brilliant movement to get across Dan Burn. And then the way he put it away was as good as Alan Shearer back in front of the Gallagher back in the day. It was a fantastic finish. But what I really liked about the second one was his awareness and his desire to get back up as quickly as he did from that sort of tussle that he'd had where you're talking about potential penalty earlier. He reacted quicker than anyone else. None of the Newcastle defenders reacted particularly well at all. Got straight back up, eyes on the ball, completely focused. Yes, he kind of shinned it slightly with his technique, but actually it was still a really good connection. And I don't quite know how it managed to squirm through the Newcastle defenders, and Ramsdale looked like he was moving about 1 mile an hour to try and get to it. But actually, you know, from Romero's point of view, what a way to step up. And yeah, you can't really praise him anymore. And afterwards, he was talking in that interview where he's sort of comparing it to Leo Messi. I wasn't quite sure what his point was there, whether it was, as you say, you pick up some tips, or whether he was kind of comparing it to some of Messi's great goals, which I'm not quite sure I'd go that far. But he was saying about the performance overall that he thought what he really liked about today was the mentality of the team after the difficult few games where they haven't been good enough. And I like his mentality in particular, and I like the way Tottenham's players stuck to the game plan, because I think a lot of fans are starting to wonder, and we've even questioned it ourselves on here, whether he's starting to lose the players a little bit over his tactics, constantly changing the players and formations. But the tactics seem to be to go out and stifle Newcastle, as it has been at times this season, with that intensity of that press. Bergvall, I thought, led that quite well against a really difficult opponent who are so full of energy and power and talent. So even though it might not have been the most exciting football to watch for the most part until Romero stepped up at the end, at least the way the team showed that mentality that he's talking about to stick with the plan and got their just rewards after the injustice of the penalty, I think they have to take a lot of credit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about results in the end. I mean, Jamie Carragher did mention it during the commentary. The narrative changes dramatically. If Spurs lose 2-1, albeit to a rather unfortunate penalty, we are going to pinpoint the lack of chances being created, the toothlessness that continues to be very obvious both at home and away. You get a point like this, and who knows, perhaps it's going to have a really good transformative effect. And talking of mentality, a word about Vicario. We all know what happened to him on Saturday night. I was really pleased both to hear and then read afterwards that the Spurs fans, and well played to those Spurs fans who went all the way up to Newcastle tonight, were belting his name out. I mean, what he did on Saturday was unfortunate. Goalkeepers do that. And I think we all agree that, you know, you don't ever want to boo a player. I mean, that is wrong, no matter how frustrated you are. And I get it. Tom A said it in the reaction podcast after the Fulham game. You've got to put it into perspective, the fact that Spurs fans are paying a lot of money, particularly the season ticket holders. And what have they seen? Three Premier League home wins in this calendar year? So when you keep saying this sort of, I don't know how you describe it, but you get so frustrated, and sometimes you react in a way you shouldn't. That was wrong. I sincerely hope we don't hear that again, but I thought Vicario responded really well. And when he makes errors, he tends to make really high-profile errors, as most goalkeepers do. But I actually think this season, aside from 2 or 3 awful moments, I think he's been really good. And, I think it's important that we try and remember that, irrespective of our overall frustration, based on the fact that our league form in 2025, particularly at home, has been terrible.
Yeah, I think that's about right. But I also, listening back to the pod that Tom and George did the other day, I actually see Tom's point that he made about the incident with Vicario and why it just annoyed the fans so much over how did Tom describe it? Almost the arrogance of his decisions. It wasn't just like one decision not to clear it. It was not clearing it and then feeling the sort of feel of the crowd wanting, the anxiety of it, and then continuing to play and try and play it down the line, trying to pick out a pass. It just, there was a sort of a bit of a litany of mistakes that he really didn't need to do. It wasn't just one, bad error and they was punished. It felt that's what was so frustrating in the context of the year they've had at home, Tottenham. So I thought Tom explained where the frustration came from the Spurs fans very well. And for those from outside who just sort of suggest that, booing your own players is wrong and there's no context to it. And I sort of fundamentally agree that it isn't right to boo your own players, but I just think it's a slightly more nuanced incident than just to sort of castigate fans for it. Outright. And I thought Tom explained that well. So anyone who hasn't listened to that podcast, go back and listen to that to hear that argument. But yeah, Vicario, I was going to point out, you obviously heard it as well, that there was a moment where I think he made one of the saves and you could hear the fans right up in the gods at St James's, where the away fans are, very far away, barely seeing the pitch. You could hear them belting out his name. And that was quite the message. And that kind of does underline the difference that you get between away supporters and sometimes the home crowds, not just at Tottenham, at every club. But they clearly back their man. And I think you're right. Overall, he's had some mistakes this season. Obviously, Fulham was the major one, but he's also had some really good games. Tonight wasn't like one of his stellar games. Actually, Tottenham did well to stifle Newcastle generally. He made a few good saves, but he was just solid and he looked confident. And there was a world where another character who's not as strong mentally as he clearly is may not have been. So a good response from Vicario and a good response from the away supporters.
I mean, the interesting thing is, in terms of, Newcastle are a tough nut to crack at St James's Park, but you made the point right at the start of this pod. We're actually just above them in the league table. And I think a lot of the trouble for Spurs in particular is simply that we are so bad at home, where 60,000 people watch the team every other week, that of course it feels perhaps even worse than it is. Whereas for Newcastle, they got their first away league win of the season at the weekend. But generally speaking, they've been poor on the road, and maybe you just get away with that a little bit more. So, I mean, that's perhaps something to bear in mind. I also want to ask you, the thing that keeps really striking me, and first I want to see if I can get confirmation from you, because we keep talking about the fact that Thomas Frank does not like his players to shoot from outside the box. And apparently they must have done the sums and said that the percentages don't work. And yet week in, week out, we are falling victim to, if not wonder strikes, then certainly really good strikes from distance. And it happened again tonight. Guimaraes, of all players, given far too much space. But it's another fabulous finish. So my 2 points here really are, why is Thomas Frank supposedly against shooting from outside the box? Because so much can lead from it. And some of Tottenham's goals this season have come from it. So I really want to know why that is the case, if it really is. But secondly, how is Guimaraes able to find himself in so much space for his goal tonight? And why do Spurs keep seemingly conceding wonder goals from just outside the box?
Well, on the first point, I think fundamentally is because Thomas Frank is quite a stats-heavy kind of manager. He very much believes in the numbers, which is why they're so painful when they're put back to him when he has an XG of less than half or whatever it is. I do think he puts a lot of stock in those numbers, epitomised by his belief that the numbers don't back up the how worth it is to take these efforts from long range. I think he's more talking about the ones from 30 yards plus rather than just outside the box. And to be fair, a lot of the goals that Spurs have conceded of late from distance have been just outside the box rather than really, really far out. So he did an interview with Sky recently where he had the tactics board up and he was very much explaining his logic behind it. So I think that's where that comes from. But again, back to another podcast Tom did a while ago, he talked about the sort of vibes element of having a shot sometimes in a game can just get the crowd going like a a full-blooded tackle can as well. So, and in the age-old sort of, if you don't buy a ticket, you don't win the raffle element comes in it from time to time. I don't think it's like, never allowed, but it is notable off the top of my head, rather than going through the numbers, that it doesn't seem to happen too often. And then back to the goal. I actually think Anthony Gordon was a big part of this particular goal. He came on, and that was a big difference between Spurs and Newcastle tonight. Even though it was ultimately a draw, is the quality that Newcastle had off the bench to be able to bring Gordon on for Barnes, who was marshalled quite well, but has been in great form. Two players that Spurs looked at a lot in the past. And when you saw Johnson sort of barely making any kind of impact off the left, once again, not looking like he really suits that position in this Thomas Frank team, at least, there seems to be quite a fundamental difference between the quality of the options out wide, and the way he sort of flew past Porro, who's having a bit of a tricky time, I'd say, generally at the moment in his performances. And obviously we know what he said after the game the other day about fans, but just generally on his performances, I don't think he's playing that well. And the way Gordon went past him was just what Newcastle needed at the time. Got it back. Voltamade lays it off, and it's a fantastic finish from Guimaraes. But it does seem to be a bit of a trend. And so the fact that Frank doesn't like doing it himself must grate a little bit for supporters.
It does. Trust me, Tom. It really grates. And then for Guimaraes, of all people to have so much space, and of course find a great finish, but that's what you expect a top player to do. Okay, well, in fact, quickly before we look ahead to Brentford and the significance of that match, there's more talk maybe in terms of looking for some better options come January out wide, that Semeno's name is being mentioned again. Can you give us a little saucy update on that, perhaps?
Well, from what I'm hearing, not particularly saucy, but let's talk about the report. There's a Sky Sports News report saying that Tottenham are intensifying their move to try and get Semeno in January. So context of this is Semeno has a release clause of 65 million. I think it might be 60 plus 5 million, which is a fantastic fee for a player of his quality this January. And then in the summer, it might even drop down more to sort of around 50, 55. So given what a player he is, it's a great deal, I think, personally. Probably not that surprising because he signed a new contract in the summer. And when he did that, given all the interest that was in him, you always sort of suspected that maybe there was a release clause. Tottenham really wanted him in the summer, I'm told, by numerous sources. They really, really liked him. Couldn't get a deal done. They're interested again. I would not be surprised if Sky's report is correct. I've been trying to find out today from the Tottenham end. I'm not really hearing anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was correct. It's probably quite likely it is that Spurs are very much keen on him. But what I'm hearing so far is I think I imagine he might well be holding out, from what I'm told, for one of the big three in the Premier League. So Spurs might have their work cut out for him to sign him, and that's not surprising given. If he had a chance to go in the summer and he didn't move, given how it's been going so far this season, I don't know. Personally, I think he'd be an absolutely fantastic signing. So I hope they make it happen because he's just what they're missing on the left. You already talked about Odegaard, was playing there. Now he can't get game. Johnson come in, has no impact whatsoever. It really feels like that left side is where Spurs are really, really struggling, where they need a top-class player. And with his talent, his ability to get in behind, his goal scoring ability, his power, everything about his game, Semeno, where he's at in his career, the fact that Ghana aren't even in AFCON as well, so he'd be able to play. His motivation, he'd just be the perfect signing. But I've said that before, if Spurs can get it over the line, that would be a fantastic deal, but it feels like they've got a long way to go before that happens.
Yeah, obviously there are going to be other challenges, and I guess we can say to him, look, you're going to play, you're going to be the main man, which won't necessarily be the case if he goes to one of those other, quote, bigger clubs. But I'm not sure what sort of ambitions he has in that regard. Turning our attention then to Saturday, and after what happened last Saturday, it goes without saying that Spurs have got to win a home game. If they don't, and of course the irony is that Brentford are the team coming to town, if Spurs lose again at the weekend, despite getting a point at Newcastle tonight, do you think Thomas Frank's job is in serious jeopardy?
Well, he was asked about the patience that he will be hoping the owners have before this game in the press conference lead up to it. And he said he was very confident in them seeing through this project. And that line ended up leading the BBC News website, which shows you how much there's interest in how he's getting on at the moment, the difficult week he's had. I am of a similar mind that even if they lost at home to Brentford, that they would still sort of go with it for now, definitely. But there's no doubt that it's not been going particularly well, obviously at home, and it's a weird one. Like last week with PSG, they conceded 5 and they lost, but there was a sort of element of positivity going into the Fulham game, given how bad Arsenal was. And then I wonder if tonight, nicking the point right at the end, and the sort of justice prevailed after the unfair penalty. Again, the mood might be slightly more positive, but it took 6 minutes for that to be completely destroyed. All that optimism last Saturday. This one will have a similar feeling. Another West London team coming, but obviously because of the connection that Thomas Frank has to Brentford, adds an extra layer of intrigue. The fact that Brentford are above, or at least the weekend were above Spurs. I remember after tonight's result, I'm not quite sure if Brentford is still above them or not, but they've obviously adapted very well despite having Frank leave after 6 fantastic years there. There's a lot of subplots going into this game, aren't there? And I do think it'll be fascinating to see what the fan reaction is in this match, whether they start to really sort of get behind him, or if we have a similarly bad start, if it gets even worse than last weekend. It just feels like going from one game to the next at the moment with Frank, and the pressure doesn't seem to alleviate.
I mean, the one thing I'd say about that game against Fulham, as horrible as it was, and those first 6 minutes are going to be etched on our soul for a long time to come, I don't think you can hang either goal at his door. And after that, perhaps inevitably, because Spurs are 2 down, they're going to have to chase. Actually, I mean, it wasn't a great performance. It wasn't a bad performance against the Fulham side that have shown again tonight, actually, against Manchester City, that they're half decent. But you can't keep making excuses. And it's going to be, obviously a very important 90 minutes. I just wonder, maybe I'm adding 1 and 1 and making 3 here. But Oliver Glasner is suddenly mouthing off quite publicly about how Crystal Palace have effectively let him down in the transfer window, etc., and how even in January it's too late for them. Do you think conceivably there is a little plot going on backstage, and should something happen to Frank, Glasner would be A1 to succeed him?
Well, I think the conventional wisdom in football at the moment has been that Glasner's likely to leave Palace at the end of the season when his contract runs out. He's got previous at other clubs of having similar situations. He left Frankfurt, or he was already announced to leave Frankfurt before they even played in the cup final towards the end of his time there. I think he's a fantastic manager. He's one that Spurs have looked at before. And he's unlike Ruben Amorim, has shown that you can play 3-4-3 and make it work really, really well. And he's won the FA Cup with Crystal Palace. I mean, it's just enough said. Really unbelievable what he's done there. But I feel that most of the noise around Frank has mainly been external so far. Don't really get the sense that there's much of an internal element. Of course, when the external noise is primarily coming from the supporters, and if that consistently happens, then you'd think that would have some sort of impact. But I said this last time, like, we're in this interesting position with the ownership, in that it's the same ownership, but it's the different ownership. It's the same family, but it's different people, and they're talking about a new era. And the way Frank is talking, I suppose when he's asked the question like, "Are you confident?" he's going to say yes, confident. But so how much can you read into that? I don't know. But like I say, I'm not getting the sense that it's anything more than an external frustration from the supporters more than anything at the moment.
Yeah, well, that frustration is only going to intensify if we get the wrong result at the weekend. Should we play a little bit of Thomas Frank bingo and try and work out Assuming he knows the significance of this game. So Van der Ven, we know the back line. Van der Ven presumably comes in for Danso. You're right about Porro, by the way. He really did not help himself in terms of the way he conducted himself the other day, and his form kind of freaks me out a bit. I know he's capable of some really good corners in particular, but his crossing of late has been horrendous. And I think, oh my God, this is our set piece man. And he's flying balls 20, 30 yards beyond where they should be going and all the rest of it. So he's winding up the fans a little bit. So, don't know. I actually thought, I kind of hoped he didn't play tonight. And I know Doggy's not in his best form at the moment, but I'm thinking Spence right back on Saturday. Keep a Doggy going. I mean, I'll probably be wrong with that. The two centre-backs we know about. Up front, I'm liking Kolo Muani more and more. There was that terrific little run he made just before he was substituted tonight. I think he's going to come good. But it's still very hard to know who to pair him with because Richarlison is... Well, he's a comic figure, isn't he? Look at the way he's diving around the place. To be fair, when VAR's giving penalties...
Well...
Yeah. But the way he was thinking, okay, they've been quite generous here. Maybe I'll get away with it. But I don't know. And we've talked about
in another
Xavi.
Game. I was going to say with Richarlison, I feel like in another game he might have risked a second yellow there for a dive. But given the penalty that had just been given, it was almost like, why not have a go? I think Moani, I've said for a while, I think he's a really graceful, technically gifted player that can be unlocked and be a really good striker if he can stay fit for Tottenham. I love his link-up play. I love the way he moves. And bear in mind, he's playing with that contraption effectively on his face to protect his fractured jaw. And there was one point where it kind of came off and you sort of felt for him. But he's playing in a team that is really not creating many chances at all. He is the archetypal feeding off scraps right now. But he's still, I think, impressing. Maybe that's because the bar's very low. So maybe it's not hard to surpass expectations. But I like what a footballer he is. He's not just a finisher. He seems to be a good link-up play striker as well. And if they can get more out of him, that would be good. I mean, Xavi, surely now? Surely at home to Brentford. This is a Brentford team, by the way, who've had some fantastic results this season at home.
Yeah.
But they're not great away from home. And sooner or later, Tottenham... This feels like the one where they got to try and find a way. They've got to try and replicate that Copenhagen performance, don't they, in the Premier League? And I know it's not easy because Copenhagen would probably be relegated if they were, well, definitely, I imagine, if they were in the Premier League in terms of quality of their players. They feel like a championship side. But I don't know, he's got to do something to get the fans off their seats and maybe start games a bit quicker. He's so cautious at the moment. I've mentioned lack of shots on target in the last 4 games, literally 0 in the first half. I would like to say, I would like to see, as George said the other day, keep it simple, 4-2-3-1, get Xavi in there in the middle, and try and make it work. But he keeps changing it. It's impossible. Like you say, it used to be Pep Roulette. Now it's definitely Thomas Thomas bingo, isn't it?
Yes. Well, we're recording this on Tuesday night. Brentford actually go to Arsenal on Wednesday night. And then they come to us at the weekend. So they've got quite a grueling week. I mean, it's really difficult. I feel, although I have my doubts about Xavi and have actually from, as I keep saying, the week before he properly joined Spurs, saw him playing for the Netherlands, but he's got to be given a decent chance. So start him. Please, I always want Bergvall in the starting 11. I want to see more of Archie Gray. I think he's a fantastic talent that needs nurturing, but give him some more opportunities. But it's difficult. And I'll go back to my point earlier in this pod, Tom, and thank God I'm not the manager because I don't know the answers. But Thomas Frank has had enough opportunities now to play him there, and this, that, and the other in different formations, etc., etc. The time has come. Stick to what you think is the right way forward and go with it for a period of time. And we'll see if he can do that. But anything else you want to say before we head off?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, give a shout out for the places people can find us, maybe, as always.
Well, we can. We will. Yeah, go on. You're better than me at this. Go on. I think you are.
Well, anyone who's already watching us on YouTube, anyone who's watching us on YouTube already, please give us a like and subscribe. It always makes a difference. But if you don't already, if you mainly just listen to this audio and you fancy watching this, if First of all, you can stream it on Spotify, but if you want to go onto YouTube, it's at the Tottenham Way Pod. You can get in touch with us at the Tottenham Way Pod at gmail.com, and that is quite relevant this month because every month we're trying to do Q&A podcasts once a month. I think we might look to do that potentially the week ahead of Liverpool because I think there's no midweek game in that week if I'm right. So that might be a good time to do it. So please get your questions in. Let us know what kind of things you want us to talk about. Any talking points in particular? Any questions? Formation lineups, transfer targets in January, all that kind of stuff. But you can also do that via the comments on YouTube, the comments on Spotify, and also on Instagram. Twitter or X, and TikTok, of course, Marcus, and Facebook page. Please, someone like the Facebook page.
We're going big on TikTok. I think we're comfortably defeating your Facebook. It's a challenge within the Tottenham Way Pod here. Who's going to have more followers by the end of the season? It won't take much, to be honest.
The Facebook page is quite reminiscent of the amount of shots that Tottenham take in first halves at the moment, I would say. On target, rather.
Yeah. Fortunately, the TikTok's a bit better than that, but not much. But hey, we're moving gradually in the right direction. And Tom, I've got to say commiserations, really, because I admire your professionalism, and we all know that you have a great affection for Tottenham, and you cover them week in, week out. But you're a Newcastle fan, and we've nicked 2 points off you tonight, mate. So stick that up your craw, because we didn't deserve really to get knocked out of the League Cup by you either.
Not sure about that, but I think it was probably just about a fair result tonight.
All right. Thank you. That's Tom Barkley of The Sun. I'm Marcus Buckland. So Spurs have picked up a point. It may not seem a huge thing in the bigger scheme of things. It just might be a little turning point in the right direction. We will return after that crucial home game against Brentford at the weekend. For now, though, come on, you Spurs.